So Craig and I recently wrote a piece for a edited collection on Freire, and I got the call for papers, and I wanted to do something with Freire's letters to those who dare to teach. So I invited Craig to take a walk with me on this journey, and we wrote letters back to Paulo. So we wrote a series of 10 letters. So we're going to share our introductory letter, our favorite letter, and then we're going to close together. And it's kind of like a reading / performance. So we hope you like it, and we'll share about the book at the end. Dear Craig, when I received the call for papers for this volume, I envisioned taking this journey with you, another critical and transgressive scholar, and to use Freire's letters to those who dare to teach as lenses through which to make sense of the dystopian times in which we are living in, for the purpose of reframing teacher education. In our uncertain times, illiteracy comes in the form of opinion as fact, and fact as treason, where all sentiments are considered equal. And there is no such thing as an expert. Truth is relative. The more you say something, no matter how false, it becomes the truth. Yet Paulo's words continue to compel us as teachers to continue to learn, to challenge ourselves, to advocate for ourselves and our students to read the word and the world critically. Paulo's methods could not be more necessary now in 2020. As we sit sequestered in our homes in the midst of the global pandemic that is COVID-19, with a president who moves ever further from truth toward whatever serves him best. We must find the light, the hope, even in the darkest of times. I look to teachers for this hope. As parents and families have their children at home, they are able to witness remote learning and the difficulties involved in schooling their own children from home. In these times, I'm finally witnessing respect for teachers growing. I wonder if you are finding the same in Australia. My question is this: will respect for the teaching profession in general grow as a result? Will this newfound respect for teachers last? It is fascinating to read Freire's discussion of how teaching gets conflated with parenting. Paulo argues that many people do not value teaching because they view it as a form of childcare that anyone can do with little effort or training. How ironic is it that many now find teaching their own children at home so difficult and stressful? The fact that many parents cannot fathom teaching 30 students with varying learning styles in the same classroom for an extended period of time, many differently abled, and coming to school with various A scores may result in a reassessment of the value of teachers and of the teaching profession in general. The standards or accountability movement in the US, often associated with the No Child Left Behind Act, has led to a narrowing of the curriculum in general. For example, in some elementary schools, subjects such as science and social studies, those that are not assessed on standardized measures are no longer taught, particularly in urban areas. This short-term solution leads to major issues when these students reach high school with large knowledge gaps. In an effort to hold schools and thus teachers accountable, we are harming our students, educating students to be less knowledgeable about their government and the world around them, which may potentially lead to the deterioration of democracy. According to Freire, if teachers are to serve as role models for democracy, we must view democracy as a collective struggle, unify with other teachers, and advocate for teacher education programs and curriculum that are grounded in praxis. This involves a necessary revolt against children using one-size-fits-all curricula, prepackaged curricula, and drill and kill mandates with the sole purpose of increasing scores on standardized tests. Teachers must, especially now, band together to insist upon the value of their own knowledge to create curricula in conjunction with their students for the purpose of empowerment and freedom. We must revolt against systems designed only to preserve the status quo, for we as educators possess, quote, a passion to know. We must also join together to fight against outside entities, business, politics, from encroaching on the education of our children in the interest of capitalism and authoritarianism. Craig, my friend, will you join me? Educating in a post-truth world, United States, 2020.
Dear Jennifer, I accept your invitation to revisit Freire's Letters to Those Who Dare to Teach, in which Paulo describes our profession as, above all, a professional task that requires constant intellectual rigor and the stimulation of epistemological curiosity, of the capacity to love, of creativity, of scientific competence, and the rejection of scientific reductionism. The teaching task also requires the capacity to fight for freedom, without which the teaching task becomes meaningless. Paulo's letters still speak truth to me as an educator, despite the passing of 2 decades that have bared witness to the new millennium, 9/11, wars on terrorism and drugs, global financial crisis, increasing impact of technology on our daily working lives, changes of government introducing new education policies that escalate teacher workload, and the increasing impact of climate change on the planet. And student walkouts demanding action on climate change, and student walkouts in response to gun violence, and student walkouts across the planet, acts of youth standing in solidarity, and COVID. In fact, Paulo's letters still speak to me because of these things. Freire teaches us that conscientization is being both in the world, where we perform our daily actions, as well as with the world, where we have awareness of why we undertake actions and the implications of them. Even before the COVID lockdowns, I've been critically reflecting on my performances in schools, performances of teacher actions, performances of silences and inactions, performances that I hoped were transformational but might have been marking the hearts and scarring bodies of students. I've been wondering about how my identity and the wider socio-political influences of my actions and teacher-student relationships. So Jennifer, I write with you and back to you, back in time to Paulo, and forward in time to our profession. Together with each other, with our profession, and with our students and their communities, we must lift our gaze to the horizon and the dreamed utopias beyond. In solidarity, Craig.
So now we'll just take a moment to locate our practice inside of our context. I grew up in Michigan and would eventually go into the family business, teaching. Growing up in Metro Detroit, the genesis of many struggles for civil rights. The murder of Vincent Chin in June of 1982, and a racist anti-Asian attack that would galvanize the Asian American movement started in my home city. But we did not learn about this in school. School for me was depoliticized, meaning maintaining the hegemony of white middle-class America, read white supremacy. Punk rock music taught me about politics, and undergrad taught me philosophy. I began teaching in 1995, high school English. I moved to the professorate in 2012. My work now in my teaching, research, and service coalesces around issues of social justice and criticality in education and in society. My campus does not yet have a land acknowledgement statement. We are working on that.
I was a primary school student in South Australia with its proud and strong colonial symbols deeply embedded in the curriculum of the 1980s. I was a secondary school student in the state of Queensland, focusing on arts subjects in which I learnt the Western canon, the likes of Shakespeare and Mozart. In 1992, I began my post-schooling with a year in vocational education at a place we call in Australia, TAFE. My TAFE campus had a letterhead explaining that the first people's name of our campus was Kega Mabil, which means place of the echidna. It's a porcupine-like animal native to Australia. Kega Mabil was a fascinating point of learning for me. I began teaching in 1997, and I now work as a research officer with my teacher union, the Queensland Teachers Union. Part of my role now means that I have business at Kega Mabil. But 25 years after my time as a student, the non-Indigenous memory and learning about Kega Mabil is nowhere to be seen. It certainly no longer appears on letterhead. The acknowledgement to non-Indigenous peoples has been lost again.
And this is my favorite letter that I write to Paulo in response to his 7th letter from talking to learners to talking to them and with them, from listening to learners to being heard by them. Dear Paulo, as I write, cities across the US and the world unite in protest over the murder by police of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA. A white police officer, who shall not be named here, knelt on the neck of Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Daniela Frazier, a 17-year-old citizen journalist, recorded and shared this brutal act, which led to outrage throughout Minneapolis and the world. Young, first-time political activists took to the streets in the midst of COVID-19 to protest police brutality, overt racism, and state-sanctioned violence. The classroom pushed into the world. With the help of social media, citizen journalists, activists recorded peaceful protests, infiltration from white supremacist groups, and police engaging in violence against citizens, simply enacting their First Amendment right to free speech. I do not argue that there were not instances of violence on the part of citizens, but I do argue that the great majority of these uprisings were peaceful, engaging in collective action for long overdue racial justice. In this letter, you remind us that, quote, education is a political act. Our choices within the classroom determine our side. Does our pedagogy perpetuate the status quo, tracking students into categories that are always already predetermined for success or failure? Or are we truly educating for the practice of freedom? If we choose the latter, as anti-authoritarian teachers, we should let the students lead. And this is exactly what is currently happening on our streets. I caution teachers who question our young people's use of technology in the classroom, as this is precisely what has allowed the world to witness the lived experiences of communities of color in the US. Our young people are leading us. You also remind us to, quote, contribute to the training of responsible and critical citizens, which we need so badly, and which is indispensable to the development of our democracy, unquote. We are witnessing in real time our students leading and teaching us in this exact manner. These young people have changed the world. In my small city of Springfield, Illinois, 3 young women organized the Black Lives Matter protest on June 1, 2020. They were between 15 and 17 years of age. I was there and I was amazed. All power to the people. Jennifer.
And this is my favorite letter. It's in response to Paulo's 6th letter on the relationship between the educator and the learners. Dear Paulo, thank you for the gift of understanding conscientization as a continual process of questioning. For 20 years, my praxis in public education has been underpinned by belief in the purpose of education as a radical site of hope and love, and through which we strengthen democracy. Throughout this time, I've known my students. I've understood the pedagogical spaces between my students' learning and my teaching. I respected the relationship between my students and me. I now see flaws in what I thought I knew. My accrued knowledges and understandings show some insight into my students and the relational spaces between my students and me, but I have failed to ask questions about me. My professional insights have assumed that my positionality is apolitical and fixed. Now, as I submit myself to questioning, I'm becoming increasingly cognizant that my praxis is influenced by the composite of thousands of stored bits of cultural information, which are drawn from identities including white, middle class, able-bodied, tertiary educated, English-speaking, Greek Orthodox, property owning, urban, and man. As I type these words, in front of me is a photo of me with Diggers, Bozzy, NJ, Obi-Wan, Kip, Pump, and Tom. These were boys from my Thor class, where Thor was an acronym for our code of trust, honesty, openness, respect. In the photo, I'm 13 years younger and we're at bare formal, prom. It's been 16 years since we were in Year 9 history class together. After 20 years in public schools, I keep these students and many more like them in my heart. Making my classes the text that I study, I'm asking questions about the degree to which my purpose of education has been experienced by all of my students, not just the Thor boys, but Indigenous students, Asian, poor, those with disability or low English language proficiency, LGBTIQ+, and girls. I'm prompted to wonder about the cultural appropriateness of my pedagogical choices. I wonder about safe spaces and inclusiveness of multiple perspectives. I wonder about the experiences of students with diminished reserves of cultural capital that I was unconscious to. Most of all, I worry about experiences of domination in my classes. In conscientization, Craig.
And now we'll just discuss a little bit of our process and then we'll close. Paulo's 10 letters to those who dare to teach framed our contribution to the text Radical Dreaming. As a process, we were able to consider a dichotomy of personal to professional and further onto the political. This framing is embedded in Paulo's conscientization.
Then, within the personal, professional, and political, we situated stories of the individual, the relational, and the contextual. Prompted by Paulo's letters, our own stories began to find natural homes as ways of understanding Paulo's letters and ways of more deeply understanding our own stories.
As we sat sequestered in our own spaces, looking for light and hope in the oppressive darkness, we were compelled to contribute to the book, Radically Dreaming, because, quote, within dark times such as these, that the smallest of lights shine brightest, and when enough lights coalesce, they become beacons, illuminating paths forward that have been hidden or forgotten. And now we'll just really quickly discuss what we hope our chapters achieve. Dear colleagues, our letters to Paulo relive his letters to those who dare to teach. This dialogue across place and time interrogates the past to imagine better futures. We see the power of neoliberal oppression disrupting teachers' critical understanding of connections between the personal, relational, and socio-political.
Writing through the unsettled months of the COVID-19 global pandemic, we look backwards in time and see youth rising up and demanding political action on climate and gun control. And we see a future of continuing protests against oppression. We bear witness to neoliberal attacks on public education and the teaching profession in general, with demands for increasingly reductive models of initial teacher education and precarious teacher employment. We stand in solidarity with courageous, progressive, and anti-racist teachers who dare to triumph over fear.
We celebrate communities of learners who embrace critical models of pedagogy. Such communities are empowered by relationships founded on love and trust, where learning is a hermeneutical adventure, free from dominator shackles of immobility and an activist pursuit of transformational hope. Progressive teachers model armed love in their fight for public education, their schools and students, and even their jobs.
We recognize the need for discipline in the political struggle for resistance and freedom. This means attending to the hard work of self-study and learning, then attending to our relationships with our students with humility, respect, patience, and perseverance.
To our future colleagues, beginning teachers and graduate students, we attest to the wonderful adventures that you will have as progressive teachers who dare. Have the discipline to read your identity as a text, but also read beyond your experience.
To those who dare to come to teaching from positions of privilege, we call on you to use your privilege both in the armed love fights for justice and as a shield of love for your oppressed students. This is the time
for daring.
For daring. Now
and ever. Always.
Always.
Jen.
And Craig.
Thank you.